So this is why the study they're promoting is bad from a psychological study of science and understanding autistic people when we're looking at genes. Not that the science is messed up with trying to find the genes or from an evolutionary perspective or something like that. But first thing, what I want to get at is that the big overall picture is like, would you hire a particle physicist to tell you about modern politics and how the government works, that spent their whole life understanding stuff? And what if that physicist grew up in a really biased place and heard really messed up political opinions and wasn't from that country or society, but grew up with propaganda against that? That's kind of what's happening in this case. Genes, even if we discover genes that are truly correlated with autism, and we know how they're correlated, which I have already thrown a lot of doubt and said, we don't know how they work in the context of the brain. Because the brain is so complicated, so many pieces, that it doesn't tell us any insight into how they think. So we want to ask these people, how does this tell us how autistic people think? And if it's not about how we think, it's about just treating us and playing straight and making us normal, not trying to really understand us. I mean, you can't look at the psychology of a person if you don't understand it, but maybe you can make them act more normal. But to further this emphasis, I want to have a couple points. First of all, people are horrible judges. So you can't, so whenever we're gonna come with a study at something very basic, like a very basic level, without participating people and looking at the higher level and talking to people, we can come up with horrible conclusions because there's multiple conclusions. So we can look at, oh, this pathway is reduced. That must make them more this in a bad way. Or maybe that pathway is reduced, but it might actually be a good thing, or it might increase another pathway, or it might alter other pathways. We're more likely to put a negative spin if we don't understand something and we're already a horrible judge. Another theory, and this is a theory in math and machine learning, a real theory called NFL, no free lunch theorem, is that every way of thinking and computation has its pros and cons, and we can prove this with math. And for example, if we design compute chips that can handle many more digits with a more complex algorithm that uses much more computation power, it actually can slow down on simple calculations because it's wasting that power on to figure out that, hey, this is a simple calculation. I don't need to use 100 bits of data to do 1 + 1, but it still has 100 bits kind of somewhere up there. So it slows it down on fancy ones, but it can lead to faster things. And the brain can be wired so it uses more brain power for tasks or less brain power, which less brain power might be faster in some cases, but more might take longer, and that might be a bad thing, but it might do it. And it can split between tasks, like it might have a lot of power devoted to one task and very little power devoted to another task. And people might split up in different ways, leading to them faster processing stuff, or other people slower processing better, and all sorts of count. Maybe it's visual data, maybe it's auditory data that's split in different ways. And also, weaker pathways might be better sometimes because they can mean that calculations spread over a wider area instead of relying on one thing. So your brain doesn't rely on this one thought process. It relies on many parallel processes. But each of them might not be as strong or developed or as fast or make the connections as fast. Also, weaker pathway in one area might strengthen pathways in another area. Like oftentimes the story of when you lose one sense, someone's other senses become enhanced. But it all can hurt speed, and when you hurt speed, and sometimes this actually can increase speed in weird ways, but when you hurt speed, they might you might not be able to do as much with life and learn as much from experience. So you could argue that you might not be able to process fast and just do many iterations. And you can have all these things, like you can have memory more spread out around the whole brain, which might be better in some ways, in that you can access a memory if it's near where it's usually accessed a lot faster, but it might have to travel, but your memories might be less organized, and so on and so on. So every type of thought pattern has its pros and cons. And it's complex looking at how something thinks, and we don't understand how all these things work together. And we're only beginning to work with neural networks and starting to understand the pieces. And we have like neural networks with like 100 pieces that we're learning this. A couple hundred neurons, when our brain has trillions, more connections than the number of grains of sand on the beats. And we're looking at like just like a couple billion if it's a really high powerful model with a lot of simplified parameters. So yeah, we're not going to get it. And another one is you can't really tell how something, one's thinking from a distance when you're too abstract. You might make a lot of wrong assumptions though. So there's a famous experiment, and I forgot if it was with broccoli or asparagus, but it was with some vegetable, and a person was supposed to wait X amount of time. One group was supposed to, was fed, had to wait for food to, that was delicious, and the other cookies, I think it was, the one had to do with vegetables, which they did not like. First assumption is that they like vegetables over cookies stuff, which is generally true, but not always. But they want to see if they use up the patience because it's hard to wait up for cookies. And then they had to do a puzzle task. The people that ate the cookies gave up faster on these puzzles. All these puzzles were impossible though, but they concluded that this means that cookies use up your patience. But I conclude the cookies make you smarter and realize the task is fruitless, so you move on because you realize it's not worth your time. But they thought the cookies used up your patience. I could say the cookies also waiting for a reward you want, but I could say it's not the reward that you wanted, it was the sugar from the cookies. I can say that it's boosting your metabolism so you're more hyper. Or we can come up with other possibilities, and they weren't able to replicate it well because too many dependent variables and stuff. Another famous psych experiment and has now largely think that it was misinterpreted was the marshmallow experiment. And this is when they made young children wait for marshmallows, and the longer they wait, the more marshmallows they get. They've started correlating with everything with academic ability, future job success, intelligence, everything. And they found a strong correlation. And they concluded that's because it's about a person's ability to think about the future and everything. They repeated this, but these were all from white, very wealthy families. When they repeated the experiment in Africa, parts of Africa, they got 2 to 20 times longer than the average than the white Western kids. And they should be, according to that, the richest, smartest people by far in the world. What they didn't take account is that it's so much more about, it's also about obedience, it's about how much you're used to waiting for stuff. It's about all these other things, and not always, and sometimes being patient can be good. So much more. So when we're looking at such an abstract way, we can't tell what's going on. Bad. What all these things is takes away, all these studies takes away resources again from legit things, giving us accommodations and stuff. It takes away from, that money could go to cancer research, any other research. It stigmatizes it because people draw false conclusions about how we think, and it makes it seem like a medical thing and promotes more money to medicalizing it. And the more it seems like an awful disease, the more money they can get. And it takes away the power from us to study ourselves, because now you're giving more and more power and money to people outside our field, and you make it the field a thing about money. And people that do not actually care about autistic people that are just in it for the money, people that are non-autistic and don't know our experience, are more and more going to join it just for the money, and have never interacted with us instead of us. What they should be doing if they want to learn about autism is give us control of the studies and actually communicate with us. The only way we can understand the autistic mind is if we start talking to autistic people and communicating, because it's too complex for us to try to piece apart all these different things and how they interact without us talking to it. And yes, that sounds biased, but that's the only way we can do it. And sometimes you have to do it not in the most scientific way. Well, thank you very much for listening. Please like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subscribers in a year and 4,000 watch hours, which is really hard, but with your help, I think I can do it. Also, if you have any suggestions for future videos, comments, questions, anything, leave them in the comment section below. Thank you very much again. Goodbye.